Okay, hello people. So today we are going to work on this little interaction system, actually hold to interact system, or I should say. So this is kind of the final result that we are gonna get. So what we have got is there's two actors right now. This is of course box, a little interactable. We have got a nice widget, so that displays when I'm hovering over an actor, and this is a trace-based interaction. So yeah, so if I can interact with this, I can see the it's calling a print string function, and there it is. And now to hold to interact, I have got this another actor and I can hover over it and I get another progress bar. So yeah, I can interact with this one, and for the binding I have set this to a sequence right now, sample one. So yeah, this is kind of the final result that we are gonna get, and we are gonna implement this with interfaces and the actor component for interaction logic. So yeah, let's go with that. Let's go ahead and implement this. So this is default template in Unreal Engine 5.7, so I'm going to use that one. So let's just get right into it, and I'll create an underscore mean folder, and in underscore mean I'll create blueprints, then interfaces, then I'll create another function, another folder called components. Then I'll go into the interfaces function, then I'll just add a blueprint interface. I'll call this I underscore interactable. There we go. Now we need four functions here. So the first functions are going to be our hover, on hover, and on unhover. So basically to display and undisplay this widget that we had. Sorry, it was not in this one. Yeah, so we had that widget that and the text that I'm a box and I'm a cylinder. So we need those text, and then we need a actual uh, interact event. Let me just rename this as well. On hover, and on hover is also going to return a message. So the message can be anything for this for the cylinder and the box. It was I'm a box and I'm a cylinder. So I'll do an output here, and it should be a string. Let's create an unhover event, and this one doesn't need any outputs. So there we go. And now we need another event, and that is going to be get interact time. Interact time. There you go. And of course the time is going to be a float value. So I'm going to result, and it should be a float. There we go. Now we can implement this interface in any actor, so we are not going to use inheritance or something to get the logic done. So yeah, that's why I'm using interfaces, because yeah. And then let's go to components. Then we are going to create a interaction component, blueprint class, actor component. I'll call this AC underscore interaction. There we go. So let's place that into our first person character. It should be in first person blueprints. There it is. Now I'll just add that component in there. We have that. So now what we are going to do is let's create the widget as well. Let's go to the underscore main folder, UI. I'll create the widget here, user interface, widget blueprint. It should be a user widget, WBP underscore. I'll call this interaction pop up message. That should do it. For now I'll just do a canvas panel. Of course we can later we can do a HUD or something and have that widget on there. Yeah, for now I'll just do a canvas panel, and then I'll get a vertical box, and I'll place that on center. Position x should be 0, same for y. Alignment should be 0.5 and 0.5. Then for now I'll just get a text in there. This one should be focused to fill. Horizontal alignment should be center, same for the vertical. And I'll just type word here, message, and that should do it for now. Yes, so now let's go to the our interaction component. I'll just get the begin play event. I think my keyboard stopped working. Yes, that works. Now begin play. I'll just call it parent version. It really doesn't matter if we call the parent version not here, because this is not being inherited from any other class. That's the default class by every games as well. So it doesn't matter, but still I'll add that. Now what we need is we need two functions here. The first one is, let's say, initialize the interaction message user widget, and the other should be, actually now we need functions for enabling starting or ending the interaction trace. Let's start that. Let's do that. Start item trace and custom event L1, and end item trace. Now let's call the initialize, call these functions. Okay, and I want the trace to be enabled by default, so I'll call this function start item trace in the begin play event. There it is. Now let's implement this initialize interaction message user widget function. So in there, what we need to have is, so basically it should be creating a widget. So create widget, and that is called WPB interaction pop-up message. There it is. I will add it to viewport right away, and actually before that I'll promote this to a variable. I'll wanna keep a reference to it. Interaction message user widget. I'll do underscore reference. There it is. I'll put this into a category. Now we add this to the viewport, but I don't want to see any random messages or something, so I'll go ahead and I'll set the visibility to collapse. Okay, now actually let me just do this. I'll disconnect this node, and if I play the game, you can see that I get the message. Yeah. Let's just set the visibility to collapsed. Now for the item traces, I'm not going to use the visibility channels, so we'll create a new trace channel for this one. So let's go to the project settings. I'll search trace. There it is, trace channels. I'll add a new trace channel. It should be called interaction, and the default response should be ignore. There it is. Now I can get a timer here, because since we are doing it by hold to interact, it needs to implement by a timer. Okay, so I'll just set timer by event. I'll do 0.1 here. Okay, of course you can change this number, but I think 0.1 should work just fine, and I'll set this one to looping. And yep, now I'll create another custom event here for the binding. I'll call this item trace. I'll bind this to this event, and now I'll also promote this timer handle to a variable. I'll call this item trace timer handle. I'll just put this into a category called timers. I'll just create this. Now we got to actually get the we got to do the actual trace, but before that we'll implement this end item trace function, and all it needs to do is clear this timer, clear and invalidate timer by handle, and it is. Now let's implement the trace. So I'll use a line trace by channel. You can also do use a sphere trace, but in this case a line trace would do just fine. So I'll implement this. Okay, now what we need is the camera. So I'll get the get player camera manager. From the camera manager we can get the transform component. Now from the transform component I need the get world location. This should be this chart, and then I'll get the get active, sorry, get forward vector, and I'll multiply this by the interaction range, which I'll promote to a variable, and that should be called interaction range. I'll add this to a category called core. Now, and for the default value, I think 500 should do just fine. So let's do that. And then for the end, to get the actual end location, I'll increment this with the world location or the start location. So there it is. And now for the trace channel, we need to select this interaction that we just created. And for actors to ignore, let's make an array, and that should we should just need the get owner. The owner of this component is going to be our first person character. So yeah, let's since now we have that, let me just enable the draw debug type for now, and let's see if we get the trace. Okay, and now we do get the trace, and yep, that's exactly what we want. Now let's go ahead and get the data from our hit result. So actually before that, let me just create another variable, and it should be called current interactable to um, current interactable. That is now it should be an actor reference, object reference, and I'll add this to the core class as well, category. Okay, now we need to set this here, but only if we hit hit the trace and break it. And now we're gonna check if this hit actor implements our interactable interface. So we can check this node does object implement interface. I'll put in my I underscore interactable. I'll place a if node. There we go. Now actually let's create another custom event which will be scrapping scrap current interactable. Now what this function will do is it will just set this to null pointer and disable the widget visibility, because we are going to enable it after we detect interactable. And actually we need another state condition here, which is going to be if the current interactable, if the hit actor is the current interactable. So it should not be equal to the hit actor. If that's the case, then only we go ahead, otherwise we just don't do anything. And the scrap current interactable function, we should be calling that if nothing is hit in this frame, and or the current item doesn't implement the interactable interface. And in this event, what we need to do is, first of all, okay, we need to set this to null pointer. For now, I'm not implementing the unhover here, but yeah, let's do the hover first. And along with that, we are going to set the visibility of this widget to collapsed again. Okay, there it is. That's all we need for this part. Now at here, what we need is first we need to check um, yeah, actually this. Okay, now current interactable. Now I'll check if the interactable is valid. Okay, now let's see. Okay, now okay, so let's do the case where we are still doing hovering over an interactable, but it's not the same as the last one. Because of this node, we have a check here. So if we are in the true case, that means the interactable have changed. So what we are going to do, if it's already valid, because the first time it's not going to be valid, and if we hit actor which is an interactable, this one is going to be null pointer, so we cannot access that. If we do, we are gonna get an error. So we have this is valid check here, and once we do that, we need to call the unhover function. Unhover. Now this is we are calling the unhover function only for the case when we are moving from hovering over one interactable to another interactable, while this is the case where we were hovering over an interactable but we are not anymore. So yeah, those two are different cases. Now after this, we can set the current interactable to null pointer, and we can reset it in this in the then one execution part. So let's get the current interactable again. Now I'll set this to the hit actor or the new interactable that we have just found, and after this I'll can call the get interaction. Actually, let's not do that for now. Let's just get the message. Sorry, my keyboard is just behaving. So, and then we can get the message from the onHover function. There it is. Now we have that. Now we need to set the message on the widget. So we can go back to this widget and let's create a nice function here. But before that, I'll just make this test block a variable, and I'll call this test block underscore message. Now I'll create a function called set message, and I'll get this text block, set text. I'll just put this in here. Actually, I'll do a string here. Message. I'll make this a string. Yeah, there it is. Now that should do it. Now let's go back to the interaction component. Now I'll get this widget, and I'm not using the isValid check for this particular reference because I know that this is already created in the begin play event, so we don't need to play an isValid check for this widget. So I'll just call the set message function. So and I'll pass in this result, and now we gotta change the visibility for this widget. So let's call this function again, set visibility. This time it should be visible, and that's kinda it. So let's see how that works. So now let's just create a sample item. I'll just go to main blueprints. I'll just create an item folder maybe. I'll just add a blueprint class, an actor, interactable underscore test. So the first thing that we need to do is add the interface that we created, that is I underscore interactable. There we go. Now we have got all these functions. We are not using the interact time for now, so let's implement the onHover and onHover. So I am item. There it is. Now let's just place a print string here as well. Over item. Okay. And now okay, and that should do it. Now let's just add a mesh. Now I'll add this cube. Now there's one more thing, that is to change the collision presets. I'll set this to custom, and I'll make sure that the interaction chase channel is set to block, because otherwise it won't hit it. So let's get one of these boxes into the world. Now let's see if we get that message on the screen, and we don't. Let's see why. Let me just see if it's even. Okay, it's doing the trace into the opposite direction, I believe. Let's see why is that. Where it is. So this chart location is the world location of this transform component, and then we get the forward vector. We multiply it with the interaction range. Okay, so we're multiplying it. Yeah, well, it should be an add. So that should do it. There we go. Now we get that message and it goes away when we unhover over it. So now we are not calling the unhover function actually, but yet the widget goes away because we are changing the visibility, but we are not calling the unhover function. So let me just add a print statement on the unhover function as well. So let's just do unhover, and I'll change the color of this text to, let's say, this pinkish color. Let's see if we do get that message printed on the screen. And we don't, because we are not calling that function for that particular case. But if I duplicate this and I'll change the color of this mesh, let's do this one, and I'll move this. Yeah. Now if I'm hovering over this item, I do get the message, and if I try to move my mouse onto the right and I try to hover over this yellow box instead, I'll get the message for the unhover for the white box. There it is, we do get that message. And why is that? And that's because we do have that unhover event implemented for the case where we are moving from one interactable to another one. So yeah, let's do it for the other case as well. So before I set the current interactable to null pointer, I'll call the unhover event, and let's duplicate this again. Let's have some distance between them. So yeah, now we should get the unhover effect. There we go, we do get that. And yes, so now we have the interactable system. Now we gotta implement the actual interaction. So let's do, actually before that, let's add progress bar to this widget. So I'll go ahead and I'll search for progress bar. I'll add to the vertical box. It should be set to fill, same for the text block, yes. And interact hold time. Okay, now let me just increase the sizing. Okay, that should do. For this one, I'll add a padding of 20. I know the design is just bad, but yeah, just bear with me. So, no. Okay, now we do have this. Okay, let me just see how that looks first. Yeah, that's fine. That should do it for now. So let's go to the interaction. Now let's add two more events that should be, let's say, interaction key pressed. Then we need one event for released as well. So I'll do another custom event. I'll do interact key least. So now the interaction logic depends on the current interactable item. If this function returns 0 or a number greater than 0, so yeah, that depends. So based on that, we will implement the functions. So what I'll do is I'll have a cached variable here in my interaction component, and that should be called interact hold time, and that would be a float. I'll put this into the core category, and when I press the interact key, I'll reset this to 0, and after that I'll check if my current interactable is even valid, because there's no point of going forward if this is in a null pointer. So yeah, let's place this, and if this is valid, then we need to get the interact time. So get interact time. Okay, now we have that. Now based on this, so we'll check if the interaction time is 0. If that's the case, then we should call another event. Actually, I think we do even need event. I can just take the current interactable and I'll call the interact function. Again, the interface one, which is from I underscore interactable. I'll just call that function. Now, this function is from my interface and the default value is 0. So if I try to implement this already, let me just go to this interactable test and implement the interact function. Let's do a print statement, which should say interact. That's it. And the get interact time is 0 for now, so we should get this function called from here. Now let's call these two functions actually. So I'll go to my first person character. I'll get the keyboard event. I'll set that to E. That's easier to test. Now I'll get my interaction component. I'll call this interact with key pressed. Then I'll get the interact key released as well. Released. I'll get those functions there. Now let's see if we get that message printed on the screen. And we do get that. And that's pretty cool. Now let me just do one thing. I'll destroy this actor once it is interacted with. So yeah. Okay, now another thing is we should hide this progress bar if if the interact time is 0. So what I'll do is into the set message I'll take in another input, which should be interact time. So it should be a float, of course. Now if this is this is 0, so then I'll just go ahead and get the progress bar and I'll set the visibility to collapsed. And if it's not 0, then I'll just go ahead and set the visibility to visible, and that should do it. Now we are not passing in any interact time input here, so let's go back to the AC interaction and we are calling it here. So we need to call the get interact time. Let me just move them to the right. Let's connect these nodes and the result should go in interact time. That is. Now let's see if we get that progress bar. No, and we don't, and that's pretty cool. Okay, so now what we need to do next is implement the interact functionality for the whole to trace. So now if this is not 0, the interact time is not 0, then we will need an event. So let's create an event, and of course I'll do 0.1 here as well, but and you can of course create this as a variable, but I'll just hardcode this for now. And I'll call this custom. I'll add a custom event, and I will call this, let's say, maybe interact time increment. Okay, now I had this variable interact whole time which I had reset on the key press event, so I'll just increment this here. I'll get this, I'll increment it by 0.1, which is of course because my value in the time node is 0.1, and then I'll set this to the result of this addition. Okay, so now my interact time is being updated. Now if this interact whole time is greater than the interaction this result, the interaction time of the current interactable, so I'll get the current interactable. I'll call this function again. I'll connect this. Now actually let me just get the less than equal to node instead. So yeah, if the interact time is less than or equal to the interact hold time, then we can go ahead and implement call the interact function. Sorry, I need to copy this. Then we can just interact with this. Otherwise, what we need to do is we need to update this progress bar that we have on our widget. So I'll create another function on here. So I'll call interact time bar percent. I'll take float as an input, which should be called percent. Then I'll get this progress bar. I'll call set percent function on it. The percent is my input. Okay, that should do it. Now let's go back to AC interaction, and there I'll call this function set interact time percent, and the percent should be the interact time divided by the result. And actually I'm not using a safe divide here because I know this is not going to be 0 here, because if this was a 0 it should have been handled here. So yeah, I can just do a normal divide here instead of a safe one. So I can just put set the percent here, and yes, that should do it. Now we're gonna end the timer as well, but yeah, let's just test it before that. Okay, now actually I haven't made them interact tool. I'll set this to, actually let's just promote this to a variable interact time. I'll make this instant editable. Default value which will be 2, of course. Let's see how that goes. Now if I try to click, it won't call that interact function, but if I hold, you get that interact function called, and the box destroys itself. But we have some issues that if I go to the box, I can press the E key and it still sometimes calls all of those. That is because we are not ending this timer. So yeah, let's do that. So I'll create another event here, and in interact timer, and we actually implement this interact keys. Let's just pull them down here, and I'll also show this timer handler for this event as a variable. Then this should be interact timer handle. I'll put this to my category of timers. There it is. Now in the interact key released event, I can just directly call the clear and invalidate timer by handle. So I'll just get this clear and invalidate timer. There it is. I'll do the same thing for this current and interact timer. And another thing is I need to change the visibility of this one as well. And actually what I'll do is, instead of setting the visibility directly, I'll create another function here, and I'll just call it reset. And you can call these functions and then I'll change the visibility of this whole widget to collapsed. Okay, now I'll just call that reset function. Okay, now let's see how that goes. Let me just call this and interact timer function here, and interact timer. So once it interacts with something, it's gonna complete the timer and go back to the normal state. So let's try that. Okay, now if I click it, nothing happens, because as soon as I release the E key, this event is triggered, and it invalidates the timer and resets the widget as well. But there is a problem here. That is, if we invalidate the timer, the widget goes away, but it still, I should, I should reset the progress bar, but it shouldn't just reset the visibility. So for this event, I will remove these nodes. I'll just do this one, and that should do it. Yeah, that works. Now let's try to hold the E key. There we go, and now we don't get this issue that the interaction goes on even if I release E. Let's try this one. Yep, that works. And let's try making one of these uh, zero interact time item. So of course I don't see the progress bar. I can press E again, I can interact with this, but that's not the case of course for these items. Yeah, so that's pretty nice. And I see we have some errors. Let's see what those are. It's not a valid. Okay, so what's happening is those items that we interact with are being destroyed, but we are trying to call the unhover function for them. So we can also place an invalid check here as well. So before we call the on unhover function, we check if that item is even valid or not. But if this is already not valid, we still need to call that function. So I'll just do this. Okay, that should do it. Let's try again. Okay, now let's just see if we get that error. We close the game, and we don't. And yep, pretty nice. Now, yeah, I think that's all we need for this interaction system. I don't think there's something else. Okay, let me just think. Once, um, what else do we need? Yeah, I think that's all for now for the system. I'm gonna add more things to it. The next thing I believe is going to be an pickup system, in which we would be able to choose how the player can interact with this. Either it's a volume interaction, it's a line trace or sphere trace interaction. We will be able to choose all those options, and of course it's going to be a single pickup. We are not going to use inheritance again. Instead, it's going to use some construction script logic, and it's going to update the mesh and everything on the construction script as well. So all we're going to do is select a data table row or a data asset from the details panel, and we can just reuse a single actor class for all of the pickups. Okay, so yeah, we'll do that next. And for now, yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for watching the video. I'll see you